The entire restaurant went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. A moment ago, the billionaire CEO, Lorenzo Moretti, had humiliated the trembling waitress in front of New York's elite, calling her uneducated trash for spilling a drop of water. His fiancée was laughing. The manager was already firing her. But then, the billionaire's elderly mother, who hadn't spoken a word in months, began to panic, crying out in a rare dialect of Italian that no one in the room understood. No one except the uneducated waitress. She didn't just pour water. She leaned in and whispered a secret in perfect Sicilian that froze Lorenzo in his tracks and made the billionaire drop his glass. What she said didn't just save her job. It exposed a lie that would destroy his engagement and change his life forever. The rain in Manhattan wasn't just rain. It was a freezing, grey curtain that seemed to separate the haves from the have-nots. Inside the Gilded Onyx, a 3-star Michelin restaurant on Fifth Avenue, the weather didn't exist. Inside, the air smelled of white truffles, aged mahogany, and money. Old money. The kind of money that didn't shout, but whispered commands that people obeyed before they were even spoken. Sophie Bennett adjusted the collar of her stiff black uniform. It was rubbing her neck raw, a constant reminder of where she stood in the food chain. At 24, Sophie was invisible. To the customers, she was a pair of floating hands that delivered Wagyu beef and refilled crystal flutes with Dom Perignon. Table 4 needs a refill. Now, Bennett. The hiss came from Henri, the floor manager. Henri was a small man with a thin mustache and an ego the size of the Chrysler Building. He hated Sophie. He hated her because she was quiet, because she never flirted back, and mostly because she looked tired. "I'm going, Henri," Sophie said, her voice steady. She grabbed a chilled bottle of sparkling water. Her legs ached. She had been on a double shift since 10 a.m., and it was now nearly 9 to 1 p.m. In her pocket, her phone vibrated. She didn't need to look to know who it was. It was the billing department at Mount Sinai Hospital. Her father's cardiac treatments were overdue, again. The final notice had come in the mail yesterday. Pay $4,500 by Friday, or treatment is suspended. Sophie swallowed the lump of panic in her throat. She had $300 in her bank account. She needed tips tonight. Big tips. She needed a miracle. "Listen to me," Henri snapped, grabbing her arm as she tried to pass. He pulled her into the shadows of the service station. "We have a VIP coming in 10 minutes. The booking was made under a private alias. But I know who it is. It's the Moretti family." Sophie's eyes widened slightly. Even she knew the name. The Morettis owned the largest shipping conglomerate in Europe. They were Italian royalty without the crowns. "Lorenzo Moretti is coming with his mother and his fiancée. That model, Beatrice Sinclair," Henri whispered frantically, wiping sweat from his forehead. "They are notoriously difficult. Lorenzo has fired service staff for breathing too loudly. Beatrice, well, she eats waitresses for sport. You are assigned to their table." "Me?" Sophie asked, a cold dread settling in her stomach. Henri, put Jason on it. He's the head waiter. "Jason is sick. You're the only one who speaks clearly enough and doesn't drop things," Henri sneered, though it was a backhanded compliment. "Don't mess this up, Bennett. If the Moretti table complains, even once, you're out. And I'll make sure you don't get a reference for a job at a burger joint, let alone fine dining." "I understand," Sophie said. "Good. Fix your hair. You look like a stray cat." Sophie walked to the restroom to check her reflection. Dark circles haunted her eyes, contrasting sharply with her pale skin. She splashed cold water on her face. She looked at herself in the mirror. "You are not a waitress," she told herself, repeating the mantra she used every night. You are Sophie Bennett. You were a scholarship student at the University of Florence. You studied Renaissance art. You are intelligent. You are worthy." But the reflection stared back, wearing a uniform that smelled of kitchen grease and fear. She had left Florence 3 years ago when her dad got sick. She had left her dreams, her art, and the language she had fallen in love with. Now, Italian was just a ghost in her head, a reminder of the life she could have had. She stepped back out onto the floor just as the heavy oak doors swung open. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted instantly. The low hum of conversation stopped. 3 figures walked in, flanked by 2 large security guards who stayed by the door. Leading the pack was Beatrice Sinclair. She was stunning in a terrifying way, wearing a red Valentino dress that cost more than Sophie's father's life insurance policy. She walked as if she owned the floorboards beneath her heels. Behind her was Lorenzo Moretti. Sophie felt her breath hitch. The tabloids didn't do him justice. He was tall, over 6'2", with broad shoulders, clad in a bespoke charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. His hair was dark, swept back, and his face was a mask of bored, lethal intelligence. He didn't look at anyone. He looked like a man who had the weight of an empire on his shoulders and resented every ounce of it. But it was the 3rd figure that caught Sophie's attention. Holding Lorenzo's arm was an elderly woman. She was tiny, frail, dressed in black lace that looked decades old but impeccably made. She walked with a cane, her hand trembling violently against her son's sleeve. Her eyes were darting around the room, wide with confusion and fear. This was Donna Isabella Moretti, the matriarch. Rumor had it she had been a recluse since her husband died 5 years ago. "This way, Monsieur Moretti," Henri said, bowing so low his nose almost touched his knees. "We have the private alcove prepared." Lorenzo didn't acknowledge Henri. He just kept his hand gently over his mother's trembling fingers on his arm. "Mama? Piano." "Slowly," he murmured. Sophie stood by the private alcove, her hands clasped behind her back, trying to make herself as small as possible. As they passed, Beatrice brushed past Sophie, her red purse smacking hard against Sophie's hip. "Watch it," Beatrice snapped, not even looking at Sophie. "Apologies, madame," Sophie whispered, though she hadn't moved an inch. Lorenzo stopped. He turned his cold, steel-grey eyes onto Sophie. For a second, Sophie felt like she was being scanned by a predatory animal. He looked at her cheap shoes, her frayed collar, her tired eyes. "Water," Lorenzo said. His voice was deep, raspy, and devoid of warmth. "Room temperature, no ice, immediately. My mother is thirsty." "Yes, sir, right away." "And don't hover," he added, turning his back on her. "I detest hovering." Sophie rushed to the service station. Her hands were shaking. She needed this night to go perfectly. She needed the tip. But as she poured the water into the crystal pitcher, she had a sinking feeling that tonight something was going to break. The tension at table 1, the private alcove, was thick enough to cut with a steak knife. Sophie approached cautiously, placing the water on the table with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. "Here is the water, sir," she said softly. Lorenzo didn't look up. He was typing furiously on a sleek black phone. Beatrice was checking her reflection in a compact mirror, sighing loudly. The elderly woman, Isabella, was staring at the menu, her hands shaking so hard the heavy cardstock was vibrating. "Lorenzo," Beatrice whined, snapping her mirror shut. "Put the phone away. We are celebrating your acquisition of the Venetian port. Or have you forgotten?" "I haven't forgotten, Beatrice," Lorenzo said, not stopping his typing. "But the unions in Palermo are striking. I have to handle it." "You always have to handle something," Beatrice scoffed. She looked at Sophie, who was waiting to take the order. You? Waitress. What are the specials? And don't bore me with the script. Just tell me what has the fewest calories. Sophie cleared her throat. We have a pan-seared Chilean sea bass with a lemon caper reduction, served with— Boring, Beatrice interrupted, waving a manicured hand. I'll have the lobster salad, dressing on the side. If the dressing touches the lettuce, I send it back. Do you understand? Yes, madam. Perfectly. Sophie wrote it down. She turned to Lorenzo. Steak. Rare, Lorenzo said, finally putting the phone down. He looked exhausted. He turned to his mother, his expression softening instantly. It was the only crack in his armor. Mamma, cosa vuoi mangiare? What do you want to eat? Isabella looked up, her eyes watery and terrified. She looked at the menu, then at Lorenzo, then at the room. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. She looked lost. She wants the soup, Beatrice interjected loudly. Just get her the tomato soup. It's easy to eat. She won't make a mess. Lorenzo shot Beatrice a glare that could have frozen lava. Let her speak, Beatrice. She never speaks, Lorenzo. She's been like this for months. It's embarrassing. We are in public. Beatrice rolled her eyes. She is my mother, Lorenzo growled, his voice low and dangerous. If you call her embarrassing again, you will be eating dinner alone in the street. Beatrice recoiled, shrinking back into her seat. I was just trying to help. Lorenzo turned back to his mother, taking her hand. Mama, please, just point to what you want. Isabella's lip trembled. She pushed the menu away and whispered something very faintly. It sounded like gibberish to Beatrice. See? Beatrice huffed. She's confused. Sophie, standing only 2 feet away, heard the whisper. It wasn't gibberish. It was Italian, but it wasn't the standard Italian taught in schools. It was a thick, rural dialect from the deep south of Sicily, a dialect Sophie recognized instantly because her landlady in Florence, a woman she had loved like a grandmother, was from the exact same village. Isabella had whispered, Non capisco. Tutto è buio. I don't understand. Everything is dark. She wasn't just confused. She was having a panic attack because the lighting in the restaurant was too dim and she couldn't read the English menu. Sophie's heart ached. She wanted to say something. She wanted to help. But the rules of the Gilded Onyx were strict. Staff are invisible. Speak only when spoken to. English only. Bring the soup, Lorenzo said, dragging a hand down his face, defeated. And a glass of Montepulciano. Yes, sir, Sophie said. As the night wore on, the situation at the table deteriorated. Beatrice drank 3 glasses of champagne and became louder and more abusive. She snapped her fingers at Sophie for more butter. She criticized the music. She complained that the air conditioning was too cold. Lorenzo remained silent, brooding, occasionally checking on his mother, who hadn't touched her food. Isabella just stared at the table, looking smaller and smaller. Then came the wine incident. It was time for the main course. Sophie was balancing a heavy tray containing the steak and the lobster salad. As she approached the table, Beatrice suddenly threw her hand out to emphasize a story she was telling. And I told the photographer, absolutely not, Beatrice shrieked, flinging her arm wide. Her hand struck Sophie's elbow. It happened in slow motion. The tray tipped. Sophie tried to correct it, straining her wrist, but gravity won. The heavy ceramic bowl of lobster salad slid off the tray. It didn't hit Beatrice. It didn't hit Lorenzo. It crashed onto the table right in front of Isabella, shattering. A shard of ceramic flew up and scratched Lorenzo's hand. Sauce splattered onto the pristine white tablecloth and onto the sleeve of Isabella's lace dress. Silence. The entire restaurant seemed to freeze. Isabella let out a high-pitched cry of terror, covering her face with her hands. "You idiot!" Beatrice screamed, jumping up. "You clumsy, stupid cow, look what you did!" Henri, the manager, was sprinting across the dining room before the first piece of lettuce hit the floor. Sophie stood there, her face draining of blood. "Madame, you hit my arm." "I did no such thing," Beatrice lied, her eyes flashing with malice. "You tripped. I saw you. You were wobbling in those cheap shoes." Lorenzo stood up slowly. He didn't look at the mess. He looked at his shaking mother, then at the scratch on his hand, and finally at Sophie. His eyes were black holes. "Get out," Lorenzo said. His voice wasn't a scream. It was a cold execution order. "Sir, please, she hit my—" "I said get out!" Lorenzo slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "You have upset my mother. You are incompetent. Get out of my sight before I have you thrown out." Henri arrived, breathless and pale. "Mr. Moretti, I am so sorry. 1,000 apologies. She is leaving now. Bennett, get to the kitchen. You're finished." Sophie felt tears stinging her eyes. It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair, but money was power, and she had neither. She bowed her head, fighting back a sob. "I am sorry, Signora," she whispered to Isabella, ignoring the others. She turned to leave. Her job was gone. The medical bills were unpaid. It was over. Sophie made it 3 steps toward the kitchen when a sound stopped her. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated distress. Isabella had started to hyperventilate. She was clutching her chest, rocking back and forth in her chair, gasping for air. "Mama!" Lorenzo abandoned his anger instantly, dropping to his knees beside her chair. "Mama, breathe! Someone call a doctor!" "She's choking!" Beatrice yelled, backing away as if distress was contagious. "Is she dying? Oh my God! This is going to ruin the press tour!" "Shut up, Beatrice!" Lorenzo roared. He grabbed his mother's hands. "Mamma! Respirare! Talk to me!" But Isabella was too far gone in her panic. She was babbling frantically, her eyes rolling back. She wasn't speaking Italian anymore, not the kind Lorenzo, who had grown up in international boarding schools, fully understood. She was speaking that deep, ancient dialect, fast and broken. "Uscuru, Mr. Manziano, une Mario, voglio a casa." Lorenzo looked helpless. He was a billionaire. He controlled fleets of ships. He could buy countries. But he couldn't understand what his own mother was begging for. He looked around the room, desperate. "Does anyone understand her? She's asking for something." The other diners stared blankly. Henri looked useless. Sophie stopped. She shouldn't interfere. She was fired. She had just been humiliated. She should walk into the kitchen, grab her coat, and leave these awful people to their fate. But she looked at Isabella. She saw the terror in the old woman's eyes. It was the same look her father had when the pain in his chest got too bad. It was the look of a human being who felt entirely alone in a terrifying world. Sophie couldn't walk away. She turned around. She walked back to the table, ignoring Henri's hiss of, "Bennett, stop!" She walked right up to Isabella Moretti. She didn't look at Lorenzo. She knelt down on the dirty floor, right amidst the broken ceramic and spilled sauce, ruining her uniform. She took Isabella's trembling hands in hers. They were cold as ice. Sophie took a deep breath, reaching back into the memories of those warm afternoons in Florence, sitting on a porch with her landlady, peeling peaches and learning the rhythm of the old tongue. "Signora Isabella," Sophie said. Her voice wasn't the subservient whisper of a waitress anymore. It was strong, resonant, and melodic. She switched to the dialect, the real one. "L'uscuru nun po toccare in astida. Semucha. Mario titalia dall'auto." The darkness cannot touch a star. We are here. Mario is watching you from above." The effect was instantaneous. Isabella stopped rocking. Her gasping breath hitched, then slowed. Her eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto Sophie's face. It was as if she had just heard a voice from heaven. Tu parli," Isabella whispered, her voice cracking. You speak. Sì, signora. Parlo la lingua di la terra tua." Sophie smiled gently, ignoring the stunned silence of the room. "Respiri. Uno, due, tre." "Yes, ma'am. I speak the language of your land." "Breathe. 1, 2, 3. Lorenzo Moretti was frozen on his knees next to them. He was staring at Sophie as if she had just grown wings. He looked from his mother's calming face to this incompetent waitress who was stroking his mother's hands with the tenderness of a daughter. "She stopped crying," Lorenzo whispered, his voice shaking. Sophie didn't break eye contact with Isabella. "She was having a panic attack, sir. She said the darkness was eating her, and she was asking for Mario." Lorenzo felt like he had been punched in the gut. "Mario, that was my father. He died 5 years ago." "I told her that Mario is watching her from above," Sophie said softly, still speaking to Isabella in low, soothing tones. "And that the darkness cannot touch a star." Isabella let out a long, shuddering sigh and leaned forward, resting her forehead against Sophie's shoulder. The billionaire's mother, in her priceless lace, was hugging the fired waitress covered in lobster sauce. "Thank you," Isabella whispered in standard Italian. "Thank you, my child." Beatrice, who had been watching with her mouth open, finally found her voice. She didn't like being ignored. She didn't like that the handsome billionaire was staring at the waitress with an intensity he had never shown her. "Well," Beatrice sniffed, crossing her arms. "Finally. Now that the drama is over, can we get someone to clean this mess up? And Lorenzo, tell her to let go of your mother. It's unsanitary." The spell broke. Lorenzo stood up slowly. He rose to his full height, towering over the table. But this time, his cold grey eyes weren't fixed on Sophie. They were fixed on Beatrice. "Unsanitary?" Lorenzo repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "Yes, look at her. She's a mess. And she's probably lying about what she said just to get a bigger tip. Waitresses are all grifters, Lorenzo. You know that." Lorenzo looked down at Sophie, who was now helping his mother sit back up, wiping a spot of sauce from Isabella's hand with her own clean handkerchief. "Henri," Lorenzo called out without looking away from Sophie. The manager rushed forward. "Yes, Mr. Moretti. I will have security remove her immediately if you touch her," Lorenzo said, his voice echoing through the silent restaurant. "I will buy this building and evict you within the hour." Henri froze mid-step. "Sir, this woman," Lorenzo pointed to Sophie, "is the only person in this room worthy of respect." He turned to Beatrice. "And you, Beatrice? You speak of grifters?" Lorenzo reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen and held it up. "My security team reviews the camera footage of my immediate surroundings in real time. A safety protocol." Lorenzo turned the screen toward Beatrice. "They just sent me the clip of the accident." On the screen, clear as day, Beatrice's arm shot out, deliberately striking Sophie's elbow. "You didn't gesture," Lorenzo said, his voice vibrating with suppressed rage. "You hit her. You assaulted a member of the staff because you were bored. And then you lied about it." Beatrice turned pale. "Lorenzo, it was a joke. And then you mocked my mother," Lorenzo continued, stepping closer to her. "You called her embarrassing." "I didn't mean it." "Give me the ring," Lorenzo said. The room gasped. "Lorenzo!" Beatrice shrieked. "You can't be serious. Over a waitress?" "Not over a waitress," Lorenzo said. He looked at Sophie, who had stood up and was trying to back away, looking overwhelmed. Over my heart, you have none. And this woman, she just saved mine. The diamond ring hit the table with a sound that was somehow louder than the breaking of the ceramic bowl moments earlier. It spun on the mahogany surface, a glittering halo of discarded ambition, before coming to rest next to a piece of lobster meat. Beatrice stood there, her chest heaving, her face a mask of ruined mascara and disbelief. She waited for Lorenzo to flinch. She waited for him to realize his mistake, to apologize, to chase after her as men had done her entire life. She was Beatrice Sinclair, a cover model, a socialite. She was the prize. But Lorenzo Moretti didn't even blink. He didn't look at the ring. He didn't look at her. His attention was entirely focused on the young woman in the soiled uniform who was wiping his mother's hands with a tenderness that money couldn't buy. "You're choosing her," Beatrice hissed, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and humiliation. "A servant? Over me?" "I am choosing dignity," Lorenzo said, his voice flat and final. "Something you seem to have lost a long time ago. Goodbye, Beatrice. Send your bill for the flight home to my assistant. Do not contact me again." Beatrice let out a strangled cry of frustration. She looked around the restaurant, realizing for the first time that every diner, every waiter, and every busboy was watching her. The shame hit her like a physical blow. She grabbed her clutch, spun on her heel, and stormed out of the Gilded Onyx, the heavy doors slamming behind her with a finality that echoed through the room. Silence returned to the dining room, but the energy had shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by a stunned awe. Henry, the floor manager, cleared his throat. He was sweating profusely, his earlier arrogance melting into a puddle of terrified obsequiousness. He stepped forward, wringing his hands. "Mr. Moretti," Henry began, his voice squeaking slightly. "I am so terribly sorry about that unpleasantness. Beatrice was, well, difficult. But rest assured we will handle everything. I will have this table cleaned immediately. And as for the girl," he turned his glare onto Sophie, needing a scapegoat to save his own skin. "Bennett, what are you still doing here? You've caused enough trouble. Go to the back and pack your things. You are dismissed." Sophie flinched. The adrenaline that had driven her to help Isabella was fading, replaced by the crushing reality of her situation. She was fired. She had humiliated a VIP's fiancé. She was covered in food waste, and her father's medical bill was still due in 3 days. She began to stand up, her knees weak. "Yes, Henry, I'm sorry." "Sit down," a deep voice commanded. It wasn't Henry. Lorenzo Moretti stood up. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, a bespoke piece of tailoring worth more than Sophie made in a year, and took it off. With a fluid motion, he draped the jacket over Sophie's shoulders, covering the lobster stains on her uniform. The jacket was heavy, warm, and smelled of cedarwood and expensive tobacco. "Mr. Moretti?" Henry stammered, confused. "I told her to sit," Lorenzo said, looking at Henri with eyes that could freeze water. "And I am telling you to be quiet." Lorenzo pulled out the chair next to his mother. "Please," he said to Sophie, his tone completely different from the bark he had used earlier. It was soft, almost pleading. "Sit with us." Sophie looked at him, wide-eyed. "Sir, I can't. It's against protocol. I'm the staff." "Not anymore," Lorenzo said. He turned to Henry. "You just fired her, didn't you?" "Well, yes, sir, but I meant—" "Excellent," Lorenzo interrupted. "Since she is no longer your employee, she is a private citizen. And she is my guest." He gently guided Sophie into the chair. Isabella, who was still clutching Sophie's hand like a lifeline, made a small noise of approval and patted Sophie's arm. "Now," Lorenzo said, turning his full attention to Henri. "Bring us a new tablecloth. Bring a fresh bottle of wine. And bring the menu. My guest needs to eat." "Your guest?" Henri looked like he was having a stroke. "Yes." "And Henri?" Lorenzo's voice dropped an octave. "If you ever speak to her, or any of your staff, with that tone of disrespect again while I am in this city, I will buy this building, turn it into a parking lot, and ensure you never work in hospitality again." "Do I make myself clear?" "Crystal clear, Mr. Moretti. Immediately, sir." Henri vanished into the kitchen as if his pants were on fire. For the first time in an hour, Sophie exhaled. She sank into the plush velvet chair, the oversized suit jacket engulfing her small frame. She felt like an imposter in a fairy tale that had gone wrong. Lorenzo sat down across from her. Up close, he was even more intimidating, but the hardness around his eyes had softened. He poured a glass of water and placed it in front of her. "Drink," he said gently. "You're shaking." Sophie took a sip, her hands trembling. "Thank you, sir. But you didn't have to do that. I really do need this job. Or I did." "You don't need this job," Lorenzo said, studying her face. "You speak the dialect of Caltabellotta. That is a tiny village in the mountains of Sicily. It has a population of less than 4,000 people. It is where my mother was born. It is where I spent my summers as a boy." He leaned forward. "How does a waitress in a New York steakhouse speak the dialect of Caltabellotta with the accent of a native?" Sophie looked down at her hands. "I lived in Florence for 3 years on a scholarship. I studied Renaissance art history. My landlady, she was from Caltabellotta. She didn't speak much English or standard Italian. She was lonely. So I learned her language. We used to sit on her terrace and she would tell me stories about the olive groves and the stars." Sophie smiled sadly at the memory. She was like a grandmother to me. She taught me that language is the only way to touch the heart. Lorenzo stared at her. He had expected many things: a tourist who picked up a phrase book, a student of languages, but not this. Not someone who learned a dying dialect simply to comfort a lonely old woman. "Renaissance art history," Lorenzo repeated. "And you are working here, hauling trays for a tyrant like Henri?" "Art doesn't pay for cardiac medication," Sophie said quietly, the truth slipping out before she could stop it. Lorenzo's brow furrowed. "Cardiac medication?" Sophie bit her lip. "My father. He has severe heart failure. The treatments are expensive. I had to leave Florence. I had to come back and work 3 jobs to keep the insurance active. But..." She glanced at the kitchen door where Henri had disappeared. "I suppose I'll have to find a 4th one now." Isabella squeezed Sophie's hand. She looked at her son and spoke in clear, standard Italian. "Lorenzo. Non lasciarla andare. Lorenzo. Don't let her go." Lorenzo looked at his mother. It was the first time she had made a direct command in months. He looked back at Sophie. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the kindness in her hands, and the desperate exhaustion in her posture. He made a decision. "You won't find a 4th job," Lorenzo said. He reached into his jacket pocket, which was currently draped around Sophie, and realized his checkbook was in there. "Check the inside pocket." Sophie hesitated, then reached into the suit jacket. She pulled out a slim leather checkbook and a fountain pen. "Write a number," Lorenzo said. "What?" "Write the number you need to cover your father's medical bills for the next year." "Write it down." Sophie stared at him. "Sir, I can't." "Do it," he commanded, though not unkindly. "Consider it a consultation fee. You just diagnosed my mother better than 5 Swiss doctors." "I can't take your money, Mr. Moretti," Sophie said firmly, placing the checkbook on the table. I helped her because she was scared. Not for a tip. Lorenzo smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that transformed his face from statuesque to devastatingly handsome. Proud. I like that. Fine. No charity. He leaned back, crossing his arms. Then I would like to offer you a job. A real one. A job? My mother, Lorenzo gestured to Isabella, who was now calmly eating her soup, is suffering from severe dementia and anxiety. She feels isolated because she has reverted to her childhood language. The nurses I hire are competent, but they are cold. They don't understand her. They can't comfort her. Lorenzo locked eyes with Sophie. I need someone who understands the darkness she talks about. I need someone who can speak to her about the olive groves and the stars. I am offering you a position as her private companion. You will live in the Moretti penthouse. You will accompany her, talk to her, read to her. Ensure she is never afraid. Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. Live in? It is a full-time role, Lorenzo said. I will pay you $10,000 a month, plus full medical benefits for you and your immediate family. That includes your father. The air left Sophie's lungs. 10,000. Medical benefits. It was salvation. It was a miracle. Why? She whispered. You don't know me. I'm just a waitress who spilled soup. You didn't spill the soup, Lorenzo said intensely, and you are the first person in 5 years who made my mother smile. Do we have a deal, Miss Bennet? Sophie looked at Isabella. The old woman was watching her with hopeful eyes. Yes, Sophie breathed. Yes, we have a deal. The transition from the cramped, mouldy studio apartment in Queens to the Moretti penthouse in Manhattan was like stepping from a black and white movie into Technicolor. 2 days after the incident at the Gilded Onyx, a black town car that looked more like a spaceship than a vehicle pulled up to Sophie's crumbling apartment building. The neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains as a uniformed driver loaded Sophie's 2 battered suitcases into the trunk. Sophie sat in the back seat, clutching a file folder. Inside was the contract she had signed yesterday. It was ironclad. Her father's debts at Mount Sinai had been paid in full that morning, an advance on her salary. Her father, a groggy but grateful man named Thomas, had cried when she told him. He was safe. For the first time in 3 years, the crushing weight on Sophie's chest was gone. But a new weight had settled there. Anxiety. She was entering the lion's den. The car glided through the city, eventually pulling up to the Millennium Tower, a spire of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. The elevator ride to the penthouse took a full minute, and when the doors opened, Sophie gasped. The penthouse wasn't a home. It was a museum. The floors were marble, the ceilings 20 feet high. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of New York City, making the cars below look like ants. On the walls hung paintings that Sophie recognized from her textbooks. A genuine Modigliani, a sketch by Degas, a vibrant abstract by Rothko. Welcome to your prison or your palace, depending on your perspective. Sophie turned. Lorenzo was standing by the window, holding a tumbler of amber liquid. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore a cashmere sweater and dark jeans, looking casually expensive. It's breathtaking, Sophie said, stepping into the room. The Modigliani. Is it real? Lorenzo raised an eyebrow. Of course. My father collected them. He loved art. I find it distracting. Distracting? Sophie walked closer to the painting, her hands itching to touch the frame but refraining. Its history, its emotion captured in oil. It's an asset, Lorenzo corrected, taking a sip of his drink. But I suppose that's why you're here, to bring emotion back into this mausoleum. He set the glass down, My mother is in the solarium. She has been asking for you since breakfast. Her memory is failing, but she remembers you. She calls you l'angelo del ristorante, the angel of the restaurant. I'm no angel, Mr. Moretti, Sophie said, adjusting her blouse. She had bought a few new clothes with her advance, simple, professional trousers and soft sweaters, but she still felt underdressed next to the furniture. We shall see, Lorenzo said. Come. He led her through the sprawling apartment. They passed a library filled with leather-bound books, a dining room that could seat 30, and a hallway lined with photographs of the Moretti family. Sophie noticed that in every photo, Lorenzo looked serious, driven, while his father, a boisterous-looking man with a thick moustache, was always laughing. They reached the solarium, a glass-walled room filled with exotic plants and flooded with sunlight. Isabella was sitting in a wheelchair, staring out at the skyline. "Mamma," Lorenzo said softly. "She is here." Isabella turned, her face lit up instantly. "Sophie." She didn't use the formal title. She reached out her hands. Sophie rushed forward and took them, kneeling beside the wheelchair, just as she had in the restaurant. "Buongiorno, signora Isabella. Come sta oggi?" "Good morning, Mrs. Isabella. How are you today?" "Meglio. Molto meglio." Isabella smiled, patting Sophie's cheek. "Ho fatto un brutto sogno, ma tu sei qui." "Better. Much better. I had a bad dream, but you are here." Lorenzo watched them from the doorway. He felt a strange tightening in his chest. He was used to people wanting things from him. Money, influence, access. Even Beatrice, who he had thought he might marry, had only ever looked at him and seen a bank account. But Sophie, she looked at his mother and saw a person. "I will leave you to it," Lorenzo said, his voice gruff. "I have a conference call with Tokyo. Dinner is at 8. You are expected to join us." "Join you?" Sophie looked up. "Sir, I should eat in the staff quarters." "You are a companion, not a maid," Lorenzo said, his eyes locking onto hers. "You eat at the table, and please stop calling me sir. It makes me feel like my father. Call me Lorenzo." He turned and walked away before she could argue. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet intimacy and high-stakes pressure. Sophie fell into a rhythm. Her mornings were spent with Isabella, reading Italian poetry, walking slowly through the roof garden, and helping the elderly woman navigate the fog of her dementia. Sophie learned that music helped. When she played old vinyl records of Italian opera, Isabella became lucid and sharp. Her afternoons, however, were often spent dodging the staff. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Mrs. Higgins, clearly disapproved of Sophie's elevation from waitress to family member. But the evenings were the most dangerous territory. Dinner was a ritual. Lorenzo would return from his office, looking exhausted, shedding the armor of the ruthless CEO. He and Sophie would sit with Isabella at the smaller, more intimate dining table. At first, the conversation was stiff. Lorenzo would ask about his mother's day, and Sophie would give a medical report. But slowly the walls began to crumble. One rainy Tuesday, about a month into her employment, the power flickered during a storm. The lights in the penthouse dimmed, leaving them in the glow of the emergency sconces and the candlelight on the table. "Tell me," Lorenzo asked suddenly, swirling his wine, "why did you really come back from Florence? You said your father was sick, but you could have sent money. You gave up your life there." Sophie paused, her fork hovering over her risotto. "He's my father, Lorenzo. He raised me alone after my mum died. He worked double shifts at a dockyard to pay for my art classes. He sacrificed his back, his lungs, his life for me. When he fell, I couldn't just watch from a distance." Lorenzo stared at her. "Loyalty," he murmured. A rare commodity. It's not loyalty, Sophie said. It's love. They aren't the same thing. Aren't they? Lorenzo challenged. In my world, loyalty is bought. Love is just a marketing term used to sell diamond rings. Sophie thought of Beatrice. Then you've been shopping in the wrong markets, Lorenzo chuckled. It was a low, rusty sound, like a gate opening after years of disuse. Touché, Sophie. Touché. Their eyes met across the candlelight. For a moment, the air between them crackled with electricity. It wasn't just gratitude anymore, it was recognition. Two lonely people who had spent their lives taking care of others were finally seeing each other. Sir, Lorenzo, a voice interrupted. It was the butler, James. He looked pale. I apologize for the interruption, but there is a situation in the lobby. Security is asking for you. Lorenzo's face hardened instantly. The mask was back. What kind of situation? It's Miss Sinclair, sir. She has returned, and she has brought the press. Sophie felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Beatrice. She says she has belongings to collect, James continued nervously, and she is claiming, well, she is telling the reporters that she was abused, and that she was replaced by a gold-digging mistress. Lorenzo stood up so abruptly, his chair screeched against the floor. Keep my mother in her room, he ordered Sophie. Do not let her see the news. Do not let her go near the windows. Lorenzo, what are you going to do? Sophie asked, standing up as well. I'm going to handle it, Lorenzo growled. Stay here. He stormed out. Sophie watched him go, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. Beatrice wasn't just back for her clothes. She was back for blood. And Sophie knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she was the target. The lobby of the Millennium Tower had turned into a circus. Flashing cameras blinded anyone who walked through the doors, and reporters shouted over one another. In the center of the chaos stood Beatrice Sinclair, looking like a tragic heroine in a simple black dress, wiping away fake tears. I just want the truth to be known, Beatrice sobbed into a microphone. Lorenzo Moretti threw me out for a gold-digging waitress, and now my grandmother's antique emerald brooch is missing. I just want my family heirloom back. The elevator doors opened, and Lorenzo stepped out, flanked by security. He looked like a storm cloud. He marched straight to Beatrice, ignoring the questions about his mystery mistress. You have 5 seconds to leave, Lorenzo warned, his voice low and dangerous. Not without my brooch, Beatrice hissed, leaning in so the cameras wouldn't pick up her venom. Let me check the safe, Lorenzo, or I tell the world your new girlfriend is a thief. Think about your stock price. The board is already nervous. Lorenzo was trapped. The optics were disastrous. Fine. Security will escort you. When you find nothing, you will issue a public retraction. Up in the penthouse, Sophie tried to shield Isabella from the commotion, but the peace was shattered when the police officers, brought by Beatrice, entered the library. We need to search your quarters, Miss Bennet, an officer stated firmly. My room? Sophie gasped. I haven't taken anything. Then you have nothing to fear, Beatrice said, sweetly, filing her nails. Check her mattress, officer. That's where the help usually hides things. Minutes later, the officer emerged from Sophie's guest room, holding an evidence bag. Inside, a massive emerald brooch glittered. Found under the mattress, he announced. No! Sophie screamed, her legs shaking. That's impossible. I never touched it. I've never even seen it before. I knew it, Beatrice shrieked theatrically. You thief! You stole from a sick old woman and then from me. Arrest her. Grand larceny. Sophie looked at Lorenzo, terror gripping her throat. Lorenzo, please. You have to believe me. I didn't do this. Lorenzo stared at the brooch. He looked at Beatrice's triumphant smirk, then at Sophie's tear-stained face. He walked over to the officer, took the bag, and held it up to the light. "This is a fake," Lorenzo said calmly. Beatrice froze. "What?" "The real Sinclair emerald has a Cartier hallmark on the pin. This one says, 'Made in China.'" Lorenzo tossed the bag to Beatrice. "You didn't want to risk your actual jewelry for this stunt, did you? So you bought a replica." He pulled out his phone. "My lawyers just confirmed with your insurer. The real brooch is currently in your safe deposit box in Zurich. You can't claim it's stolen here if it's legally stored in Switzerland. Beatrice, that's insurance fraud and filing a false police report." Lorenzo turned to the stunned officers. "Gentlemen, Miss Bennett has been framed. I would like to press charges against Miss Sinclair." Beatrice turned pale. "Lorenzo, wait! It was a joke, a misunderstanding." "Get her out of my house!" Lorenzo roared. As Beatrice was dragged away by the police, screaming threats, the silence returned to the penthouse. Sophie slumped against the wall, shaking uncontrollably. Lorenzo was beside her in an instant, kneeling to hold her hands. "I thought you might doubt me," she whispered. "Never," Lorenzo said fiercely. "I know your heart, Sophie. You brought the light back into this house." He pulled her close. The adrenaline of the moment shifted into something else, months of unspoken attraction crashing together. He kissed her, a deep, desperate kiss that tasted of relief and promise. Sophie wrapped her arms around his neck, finally feeling safe. "Ahom." They broke apart, breathless. Isabella was watching them from her wheelchair, grinning mischievously. "Era ora," she cackled. "It's about time." Lorenzo laughed, keeping his arm firmly around Sophie. But the moment was shattered when his phone buzzed relentlessly. He checked the screen and his smile vanished. "What is it?" Sophie asked, sensing the shift. "The merger," Lorenzo whispered, looking devastated. "The Venetian port deal. The unions rejected the contract. They say the translation was insulting. The deal is dead, Sophie. The company, everything is ruined." Sophie looked at him, her mind racing back to her studies of Italian dialects and the pride of the old country. "Let me see it," she said, her voice steady. "What?" "The contract," she commanded. "Let me see the Italian translation." The atmosphere in Lorenzo's private study was suffocating. 3 high-priced lawyers paced the room, sweating through their silk suits, while the angry voice of Giuseppe Rossi, the head of the Venetian Dockworkers' Union, screamed through the speakerphone. "The deal is dead," Sterling, the lead lawyer, stammered, wiping his forehead. "He says we are insulting the soul of Venice. He's threatening to shut down the entire port indefinitely." Lorenzo sat with his head in his hands. A $2 billion deal, and the future of his company, was crumbling. "Offer him more money," Lorenzo muttered. "I did. He doesn't want money. He wants respect." "Let me see the contract," Sophie said firmly from the doorway. Sterling scoffed. "You? The nanny? Go check on the old lady, sweetheart." "She is my partner." Lorenzo slammed his hand on the desk, silencing the lawyer. "Show her the document." Sophie scanned the Italian translation. Her eyes narrowed immediately. "Who translated this? It's technically correct, but culturally disastrous." She pointed to a paragraph. "You use the word dominio to describe Moretti Shipping's role. That means dominion, or rule. To a Venetian, that implies invasion. You also called the workers subordinati. In their dialect, that means servants. You walked into his house and called him a servant." Lorenzo looked at her, hope igniting. "Can you fix it?" "I don't need to fix the paper," Sophie said, walking to the phone. "I need to fix the feeling." She pressed the button. "Signor Rossi," she spoke, her voice shifting into the melodic, respectful cadence of the northern dialect. "Sono Sophie. Sono la voce di chi ascolta. I am Sophie. I am the voice of those who listen. The screaming stopped. Sophie didn't talk about percentages. She apologized for the clumsy tongue of foreigners and rephrased the deal. She used the word custodia, stewardship. She spoke of the port as the lungs of Italy and the workers as the breath that kept it alive. After 10 tense minutes, Rossi's gruff voice returned. Va bene. If the Moretti family understands this, we can talk. But I want you to bring the contract, girl. No English lawyers. The call ended. The room was silent. Get out, Lorenzo ordered the stunned lawyers. Draft the changes she dictates. Now. When they were alone, Lorenzo looked at Sophie with awe. You saved everything. The company, the future, everything. I just treated him like a human being, Sophie shrugged. People just want to know they matter. Lorenzo closed the distance between them. And you, Sophie? Do you know you matter? He reached into his pocket. Instead of a ring, he pulled out an old iron key. This is the key to the villa in Caltabelotta. I haven't been back in 20 years because I was afraid of the memories. I want to go back, but only if you come with me. Not as an employee, as my partner. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. I would love to. 6 months later, the terrace in Sicily overlooked a sea of silver-green olive trees. Isabella sat in the sun, humming peacefully, the darkness of her dementia lifted by the fresh air and familiar scents. Lorenzo handed Sophie a glass of wine as they leaned against the railing. The port is thriving, he smiled. But I realized something. I am the richest man in the world. Not because of the money, but because I finally learned the language that matters. He touched her cheek. Ti amo, Sophie. She smiled, the woman who had once been invisible now the center of his universe. Ti amo anch'io, Lorenzo. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying their promise out to the Mediterranean Sea. No translation was needed, and that is the incredible story of how Sophie Bennett, an invisible waitress mocked for her poverty, used the power of kindness and intelligence to change her destiny. She proved that true class isn't about money, it's about how you treat people. Lorenzo thought he needed a ruthless business partner, but he found that a compassionate heart was the strongest asset of all. Beatrice learned that arrogance is a fragile mask, while Sophie showed that dignity is armor that no one can strip away. Did you love this story of karma and romance? If Sophie's journey touched your heart, please hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. What would you have done if you were in Sophie's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for listening.